The dark oak table loomed before her, its surface polished to a mirror sheen that reflected the tension in the air. Lyra Carrington sat at one end, her hands folded neatly in front of her, the fingers of one hand tapping nervously against the surface. The weight of her grandfather's will had settled on her shoulders like 1,000 pounds, and yet she still couldn't escape the feeling that she was suffocating. "Are you sure about this, Miss Carrington?" The voice of Gregory, the family lawyer, sliced through the silence, but Lyra's gaze remained fixed on the paper in front of her. The words blurred into a haze, but the terms were clear enough: marry within a year or lose everything. Her inheritance, her future, her legacy. She swallowed hard, the room around her seeming to close in, the ornate windows offering no comfort against the weight of her family's expectations. She was only 24, and already forced to live a life in the shadows of others' ambitions. Lyra's eyes flickered briefly to the portrait of her grandfather hanging on the wall, his stern gaze staring down at her from the past. A man of principle, of family honor, he would have said. A man who would have been disappointed in her disobedience. Her inheritance was her birthright, but it came with strings that had been woven into the very fabric of her existence. The family legacy was tied to a fortune that had been passed down from generation to generation, with one rule etched into its foundation: marry before her 25th birthday or lose it all. That was her reality now. No room for escape. Her fingers hovered over the signature line, but something tugged at her heart. It wasn't just the marriage she was signing. She was agreeing to a life dictated by someone else's desires, a life she hadn't chosen. Gregory's voice interrupted her thoughts again. "I must remind you, Miss Carrington, that your grandfather's wishes are clear. It's either this or nothing." She could almost hear her grandfather's voice in her head, as if he were standing there with his polished shoes and stern demeanor, lecturing her on duty, on family. But Lyra's gaze drifted to the file beside her. The file marked Orion Vale, Valek CEO proposal. Her stomach twisted into knots. The name struck something deep within her, something far more dangerous than anything her family had ever expected of her. She had her own secrets, her own life hidden in the shadows. Lyra was not just the heiress of Carrington Enterprises. She was secretly the one funding a group of rogue hackers, Spectre they called themselves, who were waging war on the very corporate empire that her grandfather had forced her to marry into. And the man at the helm of that empire, the man she was now about to be contracted to marry, was none other than Orion Vale, CEO of Valex. She had spent months pouring funds into the collective, diverting her own inheritance in secret to fuel their efforts. They were determined to expose the corruption of corporations like Valex. But to do that, she had to remain unseen, a shadow in the background. She couldn't let her family, or Orion, find out what she was really up to. Her hand trembled as it hovered over the signature line. The plan had been so simple before: marry, get the inheritance, and keep her involvement with Spectre hidden. But now, with the weight of this decision pressing down on her, the simplicity faded into the abyss of uncertainty. Suddenly, the door to the study opened with a quiet squeak. Lyra's heart jolted as Orion Vale stepped inside, tall and commanding, his presence filling the room like a storm. His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers with a mix of curiosity and cold calculation. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his deep voice rich with authority, "but I believe this is a momentous occasion, a decision that will determine your future and mine." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Orion was the last person she expected to see here, standing before her like a stark reminder of everything she was about to become, a pawn in a game of power and business. Orion's gaze flickered to the papers in front of her. His eyes softened ever so slightly, though it was hard to tell if it was sympathy or something else entirely. "I assume this is all a formality." He didn't wait for an answer. "The marriage proposal, Carrington Enterprises and Valex. It's already been agreed upon." Lyra barely nodded, her pulse pounding in her ears. She wanted to speak, to explain, but the words caught in her throat. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. This man, Orion Vale, he had no idea who she truly was. He didn't know about Spectre, about the war being waged against his company. He thought she was just a quiet heiress trapped by family obligations, the same as any other. And he was right, for now. But what if he ever found out? What if the man she was about to marry found out that she had been the one trying to tear down everything he worked for? Her fingers hovered once more over the paper. She could feel the weight of the decision in her bones. But just as she was about to sign her fate away, Orion spoke again. "You don't have to do this, Lyra." His voice was unexpectedly gentle, a stark contrast to the cold businessman she'd expected. "We both know this is a business arrangement, but I don't want you to feel cornered into it." The words hit her like a blow to the chest. For a moment, she found herself staring at him, really staring at him for the first time. He was offering her a way out, but was she really ready to take it? Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? But before she could say anything, Gregory's voice cut through the air, breaking the fragile silence. "Mr. Vale, this is not a matter of choice. The legalities must be finalized today. There is no turning back now." Orion's gaze hardened, the shift in his demeanor immediate. It was subtle, but enough for Lyra to see the power move. The businessman in him, the one who wasn't willing to let anything slip away. He turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "Then let's make it official." Lyra swallowed hard. She reached forward, the pen trembling in her hand. Her fate was sealed. The signatures were made. But as she signed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something far bigger than she had ever imagined. Something that would change everything. And as the ink dried on the page, she realized the most terrifying truth. She had just sealed her future with a man who would be the hardest to betray, Orion Vale. As Lyra's hand hovered over the final line, Orion's voice, low and almost too quiet, echoed in the room. "I trust you, Lyra. But if there's one thing I've learned in business, it's that nothing is ever as it seems." Her heart skipped a beat. Was he on to her? Or was this just another game? Either way, it was a game she couldn't back out of now. Lyra's fingers trembled slightly as she sat in the sleek, sterile office of Valek's headquarters. The polished conference table gleamed under the cold fluorescent lights, reflecting her unease as she waited for Orion Vale to arrive. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. The contract was ready to be signed, but the reality of what she was about to do gnawed at her insides. This wasn't just about money or a family legacy. This was about power, her power. The power to dismantle a corporation from within, piece by piece. And all she had to do was marry its CEO. The door opened with a soft click. Orion walked in, his tall, commanding presence filling the room. His dark suit seemed almost too sharp, like a blade meant to cut through any pretense. His icy blue eyes flicked over to Lyra, assessing, calculating. "You're early," he remarked in his deep voice, his tone distant, yet not unfriendly. His gaze didn't soften when it met hers. It was as though he was already miles ahead of her in some mental chess game she couldn't even begin to understand. "I didn't want to keep you waiting," Lyra replied, keeping her voice even, her expression guarded. Inside, her heart raced with a mix of dread and resolve. They both sat at the table, the space between them a chasm of unspoken tension. The lawyer who had been handling their family's legal matters stood silently at the side, watching as both parties prepared to seal the fate of this arrangement. "Shall we get this over with?" Orion's words were blunt, the weight of them hanging in the air. Lyra forced herself to focus. She wasn't here for emotions. She wasn't here to make friends. This was a business transaction, pure and simple. They had their roles to play, and that's all it was, a role. Her fingers brushed over the papers in front of her, the ink still fresh on the lines that would bind her to him for a year. A year. That was all she had to endure before she could move forward with her own plans to take down Vallex. "Let's proceed," she said, her voice low, betraying nothing of the turmoil inside. Orion didn't waste any time. He signed the papers with a swift, practiced motion, his signature bold and efficient. When his pen finally lifted from the page, Lyra found herself staring at the signature lines. It felt surreal, as though she were watching someone else's life unfold in front of her. Her hand hovered over the paper, the pen cold in her grasp. A year, a whole year of pretending to be his wife, pretending to care about him. But she had no choice. Her eyes flicked up to meet his. For a moment, there was something in his expression that made her pause, a flicker of something soft, almost vulnerable. But it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by that calculating look. The look of someone who didn't trust easily, and why should he? She was about to betray him in the most intimate way possible. Lyra signed her name. The ink dried on the page with a finality that sent a chill up her spine. Orion's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, but his words were all business. "It's done. We'll announce the engagement to the press tomorrow. You'll be the perfect couple. No one will suspect anything." Lyra nodded, her stomach twisting. She didn't care about the press. The media's opinions meant nothing to her. What mattered was what happened behind closed doors, what she would be doing in the shadows. Her mission was clear: destroy him from within. And it wouldn't take long. His company's corrupt practices ran deep. She would expose them all, and he wouldn't even see it coming. As they stood up, the lawyer moved forward to hand them both copies of the contract. Orion took his with a curt nod, but before he could leave, he turned toward Lyra. "I hope this arrangement doesn't feel too transactional for you. I'm aware that this isn't exactly a romantic engagement." Lyra's lips curled into a tight, controlled smile. "It's a business agreement. That's all it ever was." Orion studied her for a moment, as if trying to read something in her expression that she wasn't willing to reveal. "Just so. I trust you understand the importance of maintaining appearances." "Of course," Lyra replied smoothly. She wasn't sure if she was reassuring him or herself. He didn't respond immediately, as if the weight of her words had landed differently than she'd intended. He took a long, slow breath, the tension between them palpable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. But just as the door was about to close behind him, he paused, his back still turned. "You're not in this alone, Lyra," he said, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. "If there's anything you need, if you change your mind, or if you're feeling trapped—" "I won't be changing my mind," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "This is my decision. No one else's." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving her alone in the cold, sterile room. Lyra exhaled, the breath she hadn't realized she was holding finally escaping her lungs. She glanced at the papers again, her signature now staring back at her like a mark of shame. "It's for the greater good," she reminded herself. "You're doing this for something bigger than you." But even as she said the words, a chill ran down her spine. She wasn't sure if she was convincing herself or lying. As Lyra sat in the stillness of the room, her phone buzzed on the table, startling her. She reached for it with a slow, deliberate motion, her heart pounding as she saw the message that had just come through. The message was from Spectre. "The job is simple. Take him down from the inside." Lyra's hand trembled as she read the words, her pulse quickening. She knew what this meant. She had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. But the problem was, she wasn't so sure she wanted to anymore. Lyra's first steps into Orion's penthouse were almost surreal. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, an endless stretch of glass and steel that reflected the harsh, unforgiving light of the morning. The place was a fortress, sleek and modern, its cold, impersonal design offering little comfort. The apartment was everything Orion Vale stood for: power, control, and isolation. As she stood in the grand entryway, a sense of unease twisted in her chest. She wasn't just stepping into a new home. She was stepping into a carefully curated illusion. Orion stood at the door behind her, watching, waiting. His eyes flicked over her, as if trying to assess her reaction. I know it's not much, but it's what I can offer. Lyra forced a smile, her lips barely moving. It's fine, she replied, trying to sound convincing. She wasn't sure what she expected, but it wasn't this. The silence between them stretched, thick with the weight of what they had just signed. They were married, but it didn't feel like it. Not yet, anyway. Orion stepped aside to let her into the penthouse, the door clicking softly behind him. I'll show you to your room, he said, his tone clipped. He was the picture of professionalism, but she could tell. There was something in the way his eyes lingered on her that betrayed his discomfort with the situation. Lyra followed him down a long hallway, the silence between them growing heavier with each step. She tried not to notice how his every move was precise, calculated, as if nothing was left to chance. He was a man who didn't let his guard down. Not for anyone, especially not her. When they reached the end of the hall, he stopped in front of a door. This is your room, he said, his voice still businesslike. You'll be comfortable here. She nodded, swallowing the knot that had formed in her throat. Thank you. But before she could retreat into the privacy of her new space, he turned back to her. His voice was softer this time. Lyra, I know this isn't easy. For either of us. She paused, her hand still on the doorknob. It's what we agreed to. Orion's eyes met hers, and for a moment there was something there, something more than just the cold indifference he usually wore like armor. A flicker of doubt, maybe? Or was it regret? I didn't mean to make this more difficult for you, he said quietly. I've seen what it's like to lose everything, to have your entire life planned out for you with no say in it. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to open up at all. She studied him for a moment, trying to figure out if he was being genuine or if it was just part of his strategy. I'm not here because I have no choice, she replied, her voice carefully neutral. I'm here because it's what we both agreed to. Orion looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. We'll make this work. We have to. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her to her thoughts. She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her, leaning back against it for a moment, her eyes scanning the space. It was too clean, too perfect, just like everything else about him. There was no warmth here, no familiarity. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Spectre, the hacker who had been leading the charge against Valex. The first attack is live. It's hitting one of Valex's subsidiaries. Watch your back. Her stomach twisted. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it had arrived, the weight of it settled heavily on her. Her two worlds were colliding, and she wasn't sure how long she could keep up the charade. Her fingers hovered over the screen of her phone, reading the message again. She had been careful, too careful to leave any trace of her involvement. But even she couldn't predict how things were going to unfold. She couldn't let Orion find out. Not yet. But the guilt that had been gnawing at her since she signed that contract was only growing stronger. The lies, the deceit, it was all starting to feel too real. Later that evening, the sound of a soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. She wasn't sure how much time had passed since she'd locked herself away in a room, but it was enough to make her anxious. Lyra. Orion's voice filtered through the door. Can we talk? She hesitated before opening it, her heart racing with a mix of anticipation and dread. When she opened the door, Orion was standing there, looking every bit the cold, calculating businessman he was, but there was something else in his eyes. A quiet intensity, an unspoken question. Something's wrong, he said without preamble. There's been an attack, a major one. It's coming from a subsidiary of Valex. Lyra's heart stuttered in her chest. She forced herself to remain composed, to hide the anxiety that was rising inside her. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, keeping her voice steady. Orion's gaze narrowed. You're not fooling me, Lyra. Something is off. I can feel it. She stepped back, shaking her head slightly. I don't understand. Why would I know anything about it? He didn't respond immediately, but she could see the wheels turning in his head. I don't know, but I'm starting to wonder if I've been played. The tension between them was thick now, palpable. Lyra's pulse was racing, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Then, as if he had decided something, Orion spoke again, his voice low. I'm going to find out who's behind this, and when I do, I won't stop until they're exposed. Lyra swallowed, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Could he be talking about me? Her mind raced, her heart hammering in her chest. She had to make a choice. Keep playing the game or risk losing everything. As Orion turned to leave, Lyra's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, Spector's name flashing on the screen. The message was brief, but it sent a jolt of panic through her. You need to decide. This war will take everything. Your marriage, your conscience, and your life. Lyra stared at the words, frozen in place. Could she continue down this path? Or was she already too far gone to turn back? The city outside was bathed in the soft glow of dusk, the horizon tinged with pink and gold. Inside the sleek, modern penthouse, Lyra stood by the window, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She stared out at the expanse of lights below, but her mind was far away. Caught in a web of deceit, she wasn't sure she could untangle anymore. Every move she made felt like a lie. Every glance exchanged with Orion a carefully calculated risk. Behind her, the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. She knew who it was before the door creaked open. Orion, always just a step away. It was almost like he was watching her, waiting for something, waiting for her to slip up. Lyra, his voice called from the doorway. She didn't turn around. We need to talk. She sighed, forcing herself to face him. The tension between them had been building for days, subtle but undeniable. His eyes, sharp and calculating, met hers, and she could see the concern simmering beneath the surface. He was watching her more closely now. She could feel it. It was only a matter of time before he started piecing things together. "What is it?" she asked, keeping her voice as steady as she could manage. Orion stepped into the room, his usual cold composure faltering just slightly. "You've been distant, more so than usual. Where are you going when you leave the house? And why won't you tell me anything about your past?" Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. She could feel the walls closing in on her, the carefully constructed mask beginning to crack. She couldn't afford for him to know. Not yet. "I'm just adjusting," she said quickly, her mind racing for an explanation. "This whole situation is new to both of us. I just need some space." Orion's jaw tightened, but he didn't push further. Instead, he simply nodded, though his eyes lingered on her a moment too long. She could tell he wasn't buying it. He never bought it. "I don't like secrets, Lyra," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "And I'm starting to think you have a lot of them." Her stomach dropped. He was getting too close, too fast, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep her own secrets hidden from him. Later that night, Lyra sat at the small desk in her room, her fingers hovering over the keyboard of her laptop. The darkened screen before her glowed softly, the only light in the room besides the faint city glow outside. She had received another message from Spector. "The breach is happening tonight. No turning back." Her hands trembled as she typed a response. "I won't let this go too far. We need to be careful. We can't risk exposing me." The reply came almost instantly. "The damage is already done. The attack is live. It's Valex's data center. You can't stop it now." Her breath hitched. She had tried to warn Spector, to slow things down, but it was too late. The hacker collective had moved forward with their plan, and the consequences would be dire. But what would be worse? The damage done to Valex, or the truth coming out? She slammed the laptop shut, her heart racing. She couldn't do this anymore. The walls she'd carefully built around her were crumbling, piece by piece, and soon she wouldn't be able to hide behind them anymore. Orion was waiting for her in the living room when she came downstairs, his posture rigid as he stood by the window, looking out at the city. The moment she entered the room, he turned toward her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You didn't answer my question earlier," he said, his voice cold. "Where do you go when you leave this apartment? What are you hiding, Lyra?" She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his gaze on her. The truth was burning her up from the inside, and she had no way to put out the fire. "I told you," she said, her voice shaky. "I just need some space." But even as she said the words, she could see the flicker of disbelief in Orion's eyes. He wasn't fooled. "Lyra, stop lying," he said, his voice sharp now. "I know something is going on. I know you're hiding something from me." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She couldn't keep pretending. It was time to make a choice: protect her hackers or protect her marriage. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. A quick glance at the screen made her blood run cold. A notification from Valex's internal security. It was about the breach. "Is this about the data center?" Orion asked, his eyes darkening with suspicion. Lyra froze, caught in the moment. She tried to keep her face neutral, but her pulse was hammering in her ears. He knew. He had to know. I don't know," she stammered. "I didn't do anything." Orion's gaze turned icy. "Lyra, I don't believe you. Not anymore." In a single, swift movement, he grabbed her phone and unlocked it. Her breath caught in her throat as he scrolled through the messages. There was no hiding it now. The evidence was there, plain as day. His eyes lifted to hers, and the fury in his expression made her heart skip a beat. "You're involved with them, aren't you?" His voice was low, deadly. Lyra opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The truth was choking her. There was no point in denying it anymore. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I'm involved with the hackers, but I didn't mean for it to go this far." Orion stepped back, the weight of the betrayal heavy in the air. His eyes were cold, but there was something else there, something that cut deeper than any anger. "I can't believe this," he said, his voice tight. "You've been lying to me this whole time." Lyra felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The marriage, the contract, everything they had built, it was all unraveling in this single, irrevocable moment. As Orion turned to leave, Lyra's phone buzzed again, the screen flashing with a new message from Spectre. "Get out now, before they come for you." Her heart stopped. Was this the end? Or had she already gone too far to stop the inevitable? The silence in the penthouse was suffocating. The weight of Lyra's confession hung in the air, thick and unyielding. She stood there, heart pounding in her chest, feeling as though the world had just shattered around her. She had known this moment would come, had always feared it, but now that it was here, it felt far worse than she had ever imagined. Orion stood across from her, his expression unreadable, but his posture rigid, like a man holding on to the last shred of his control. His lips were pressed into a thin line, his eyes burning with a cold fury she had never seen before. "You've been lying to me from the very beginning," Orion said, his voice dangerously calm. "You've been playing both sides, marrying me for my company while secretly working against me." Lyra swallowed hard, trying to muster the strength to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. She had never thought it would feel like this. She had told herself that it was for the greater good, that exposing the corruption at Valex would justify everything. But now, staring into Orion's eyes, she realized that the very foundation of everything she had built had crumbled. "I didn't want it to happen like this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you." Orion's gaze flickered with something. Hurt, betrayal, or maybe both. "And yet you did. You've lied to me. You've used me." His words stung more than she had expected, the rawness in his tone cutting through the walls she had built around herself. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she pleaded, her hands shaking at her sides. "I had to protect my family's legacy, and I thought I was doing the right thing. But then," she trailed off, her chest tightening, "then I met you, and She stopped herself, her throat closing up at the thought. How could she explain the confusing mix of emotions that had developed? Her feelings for Orion had started as a means to an end, but somewhere along the way it had become something more. And now that was all destroyed, Orion stepped back, his jaw clenched, the hurt in his eyes morphing into something darker. "I don't know who you are anymore, Lyra," he said quietly, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I thought I knew you, but I was wrong." His words hit her harder than any accusation could. She felt the walls of the penthouse closing in on her, trapping her in a life she had never wanted. She had tried to walk the fine line between her secret life as a hacker's benefactor and her role as a wife in a corporate marriage, but now the mask was gone. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. Later that day, the tension in the air was palpable. Lyra sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at her hands at her lap, the room around her feeling strangely empty. Orion had retreated to his office, shutting the door behind him as if he couldn't bear to look at her anymore. She had hoped, in some part of her heart, that he would understand, that he would somehow forgive her. But as the minutes turned into hours and the cold silence stretched on, she realized just how naive that hope had been. And then came the knock. The door to the penthouse opened slowly, and Lyra's gaze snapped up, her breath catching in her throat. It was August Vale, Orion's brother, and the COO of Valex. He was tall, his sharp features a mirror image of Orion's, but where Orion exuded control and discipline, August wore a smirk of dangerous confidence. His eyes were cold, his presence commanding. "I think we need to talk," August said, his voice smooth but laced with something darker. He stepped into the room, his gaze flicking to Lyra before landing on the empty space beside her. Lyra stood up, her body stiff with tension. "What is it, August?" He studied her for a long moment before answering, his lips curling into a thin smile. "You've caused quite a stir, Lyra. You really thought you could play both sides? Protect your little hacker collective while marrying Orion. It's cute, but not very smart." She bristled, every muscle in her body going taut. She had always known that August was dangerous, but hearing him speak with such disdain, she couldn't help but feel a wave of fear wash over her. She had never been one to back down from a fight, but August was different. He was the embodiment of the darker side of Valex, ruthless, cunning, and unafraid to take what he wanted. "You don't know anything about me," she said, forcing herself to stand tall. "I didn't ask for this." August chuckled, a dark, hollow sound. "No, you didn't. But here you are, tangled in a web of your own making. And now, Orion is in the middle of it all. You've hurt him, Lyra, and that's something I can't let go. Not when it puts Valex in jeopardy." Lyra's heart sank as August's words cut through her like a knife. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about her marriage, her family's legacy, and the company she had unwittingly become entangled with. But there was more. August wasn't just threatening her. He was manipulating Orion. He was using his brother's pain as leverage. Before she could respond, August turned, his eyes narrowing. "Orion's not the only one who's been hurt by your actions. You've made a powerful enemy today." With that, he was gone, leaving Lyra standing in the middle of the room, the weight of his words sinking in. As the hours passed, Lyra's mind raced. She knew that the next steps would determine everything: her future, her marriage, and her involvement with the hackers. She could feel the walls closing in. There was no escape from the consequences of her actions. But just as she was about to reach for her phone, another message arrived. She picked it up, her heart pounding as she saw the familiar name flash across the screen. "We're going to finish this, with or without you." Her breath caught in her throat. The hackers were moving forward, regardless of what she decided. The final attack was already in motion. Lyra's hands shook as she read the message again. There was no turning back now. The battle she had been running from was here, and it wasn't just about saving her marriage anymore. It was about saving their lives. Lyra's phone buzzed again. She clicked on the message, her blood running cold as the words flashed before her eyes. "They know. We're coming for you. Get out now." The final attack was beginning, and Lyra realized she had no idea if she would make it out alive. The night had fallen heavy over the penthouse, and with it, a silence that seemed to echo through the vast, empty spaces. The city lights flickered outside, like distant stars caught in a moment of hesitation, but inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The weight of the truth, the destruction Lyra had set in motion, was all-consuming. She had never imagined it would come to this. The hackers were relentless, the attacks escalating in intensity. They had launched their most devastating strike, yet a full-scale cyber attack aimed at bringing down Valex from the inside. Every system, every department was in chaos. The company's once impenetrable defenses were crumbling under the sheer weight of the hackers' power, and the fallout was only beginning. Lyra stood at the window, staring out at the twinkling lights below, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. She had started this war. She had always known that once it began, there would be no turning back. But seeing the destruction in real time, seeing Valex on the brink of collapse, left her with an uneasy feeling in her chest. This wasn't just about taking down a corrupt company anymore. It was about saving lives, maybe even her own. Her phone buzzed, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Spectre, the leader of the hacker collective. "We're almost there. No turning back now." Her heart pounded in her chest. She had given them everything they needed, and now they were pushing forward. But as the consequences unfolded, she realized just how much she had lost, how much she stood to lose. She turned to face the room, her gaze falling on the man who had once been her partner in this twisted charade. Orion. He was sitting at the desk, a look of exhaustion written across his face, the weight of the world pressing down on him. His company, his empire, everything he had worked for, was on the brink of falling apart, and his personal life was in tatters. Because of her. Her footsteps were silent as she approached him, but he didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the screen in front of him, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, frozen. "I didn't want this," she said softly, her voice cracking as the words slipped out. She didn't know what she was trying to say anymore, but it felt like a confession, a plea for something she wasn't sure she could have. Orion didn't answer immediately. The seconds stretched into minutes before he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "What did you want, Lyra? To destroy me? To destroy everything I've built?" She flinched at his words. "No," she whispered. "I wanted to stop a monster. I wanted to save the people who've been hurt by your company." She hated how defensive her words sounded, like she was trying to justify her actions. But what was left to say? Orion finally turned his gaze to her, his expression unreadable. "And now," he asked, "now that it's all falling apart, now that I know the truth, everything you've been hiding from me." She felt the sharp sting of guilt hit her chest. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't want to drag you into it." His eyes narrowed, suspicion still thick in the air. "What are you planning to do now, Lyra? Is this it? Are you just going to disappear and leave me to pick up the pieces?" The words stung, and Lyra swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. "I don't know any more, Orion. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. But I won't stand by and let Valex burn everything to the ground if there's still a chance to fix it." Orion stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Fix it," he repeated, his voice rising, filled with frustration. "You've already ruined everything. This isn't some game, Lyra. This is my company, my legacy." "I know," she replied quietly, her voice shaking. "And I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. But it's too late now, isn't it? He turned away from her, pacing toward the window. You were the one who pushed me to open my eyes, he said, the words almost bitter. I've seen the corruption in Valex, and I can't ignore it anymore. But now that it's all crashing down around me, how am I supposed to fix it? Lyra stood still, unsure of what to do. The words she wanted to say caught in her throat. She had pushed him to see the truth. But now it was too late for either of them. The damage was done. The elevator doors opened with a soft ping, and August Vale stepped into the penthouse. His presence was like a cold breeze, cutting through the fragile tension that had filled the room. He was smiling, but there was no warmth in it, only the cold satisfaction of a man who knew he was in control. I see the two of you are having a lovely heart-to-heart, August said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He glanced between them, his eyes flicking to Orion first, then to Lyra. But we have more important matters to deal with, don't we? Orion turned to face his brother, his eyes narrowing. What do you want, August? Oh, I think it's clear what I want, August said, stepping further into the room. I want to save Valex, which is more than I can say for either of you. He gave Lyra a look of contempt before continuing. You've ruined everything. The press is having a field day, and the shareholders are in full revolt. Lyra clenched her fists at her sides, her anger flaring, but she kept her voice steady. You've been part of the problem from the beginning, August. Don't pretend you're some savior. August's smirk widened. Perhaps, but unlike you, I know how to protect the Empire. He turned his gaze to Orion. And that's why you need to make a decision, brother. Will you protect your company, your legacy, or will you let it burn with the woman who's brought it all to the ground? Orion's gaze flickered between his brother and Lyra, a storm of emotions raging behind his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, his phone buzzed urgently in his pocket. He pulled it out, his eyes scanning the screen. What is it? August asked, his tone sharp. Orion's face paled as he read the message, his breath hitching. It's happening, he murmured. The hackers, they've gone all in. They're targeting Valex's data center in real time. The room seemed to freeze as everyone processed the gravity of the situation. The hackers were moving in for the final strike, and this time there was no stopping it. Lyra's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, her heart sinking as she saw the message from Spectre. Time's up. Finish this, Lyra, or we finish it without you. Lyra's phone slipped from her fingers as she realized the magnitude of the decision she had to make. With the hackers pushing for their final attack, Orion standing on the edge of a moral awakening, and August tightening his grip on the company, she was caught in the crossfire of a battle that could destroy everything. Would she stand with Orion, risking her cause and her own freedom to save him, or would she walk away from everything she'd fought for? The city outside the penthouse had turned a muted gray under the weight of the early morning mist. Inside, however, the air was charged with something sharper than any storm: resolve. The quiet hum of the world outside couldn't drown out the chaos within. Lyra paced back and forth, the thoughts racing in her mind, crashing together like waves, each one more overwhelming than the last. It had only been a few days since the hacker attack, the final strike that had shattered Valex's defenses, and yet everything felt like it had already been rewritten. Their lives had irrevocably changed. What was once a marriage forged in lies, manipulation, and deceit now felt like a tangled mess of conflicting desires and shattered promises. Lyra had betrayed him, Orion had betrayed her, but they both knew, deep down, that if there was any chance of rebuilding, they had to start by confronting the truth. She glanced at the man standing across from her. Orion stood at the window, a brooding silhouette against the steel-gray sky. His jaw was clenched, his shoulders tight with the weight of everything that had happened. But there was something different in the air now, a sense of quiet determination. This wasn't the cold, calculating man who had once used her as a pawn in a game he could control. This man, though broken, was ready to fight for something more, for everything. I can't fix what I've done, Lyra, Orion said without turning, his voice steady but heavy. But I'm going to try, and I'm going to make sure my brother pays for what he's done to this company. Lyra paused in her pacing. She had heard the determination in his voice before, but this time it wasn't for revenge. It was for something bigger, something better. "You're really going to do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Expose your brother? Bring down Valek." Orion turned to her, his eyes locking with hers. The hurt was still there, buried just beneath the surface, but so was the strength. "I have to. I've spent my whole life blind to everything August has been doing. But now I see. This company, it was built on lies and greed. And I won't let that continue. Not for me, not for anyone else." Lyra took a breath, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She had come here to destroy him, to bring down Valek. But now, for the first time, she was seeing him, not just as the man she'd been trying to take down, but as someone who had been lost in his own way, just like her. "You won't do it alone," she said, stepping forward, her voice more certain now. "I'll help you. You've shown me a side of you that I didn't know existed. And her words faltered as she struggled to find the right way to say it. "I don't want to keep running from this anymore. From you." Orion's gaze softened, a flicker of something like hope in his eyes. But he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he walked toward her, closing the distance between them. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice low-searching. "After everything?" Lyra nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yes, I've been running, too. But I can't anymore. I'm done hiding from what we've become, what we could be." The words hung in the air between them, fragile, yet potent. And in that moment, something shifted, something unspoken but undeniable. Their lives had been shaped by secrets and lies. But for the first time, they were both standing on the edge of something raw and real. A chance to rebuild. To rebuild not just the company, but themselves. Together. Later that afternoon, Orion called a meeting with his board members. The news of the breaches had shaken the company to its core, but he was determined to seize this moment. He used the information Lyra had gathered from the hacker collective, detailed files, insider reports, hidden financials that exposed Valek's darkest secrets, and presented them to the board with cold, precise clarity. "We're done pretending," Orion said, his voice unwavering as he faced the room full of skeptical executives. "Valek will no longer operate under the shadow of corruption. I'm exposing everything, and we'll rebuild this company the right way." The room was silent at first, the board members exchanging looks of disbelief. But Orion's words had the power of truth behind them. One by one, the voices of dissent began to soften as they saw the undeniable evidence. What had seemed like an impossible task, dismantling the empire built on greed, was starting to take shape. Lyra stood in the corner, her gaze fixed on Orion as he spoke. She had been a part of this, yes, in ways she regretted, but today she was here for something different, something she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just helping him tear down the company, she was helping him rebuild it. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like a step in the right direction. The evening came too quickly, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, Orion found himself back in the penthouse with Lyra. The weight of everything that had transpired, of the decisions made and the road ahead, hung heavy between them. Lyra sat at the bar, her fingers gently tracing the edge of her glass, lost in thought. Orion watched her for a moment before speaking, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Lyra," he started, but the words seemed to get caught in his throat. He walked over to her, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't want to just fix this company. I want to fix us." Lyra looked up, her heart skipping a beat. "Us." "I know I've hurt you," Orion said, the weight of his words pressing against her chest. "I've made mistakes, so many mistakes. But I'm here now, and I want to try again. I want to rebuild what we've broken together." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The sincerity in his voice made everything inside her twist. Was she ready to take that step with him? After everything they'd been through? Before she could respond, Orion knelt down in front of her, taking her hand in his. His expression was open, vulnerable, a side of him she had never seen before. Lyra, I'm asking you, will you marry me? Not for business, not for a contract, but for real. Will you trust me again? The world seemed to pause as she stared down at him, her pulse racing. She had always kept her distance, kept her walls up, but now, faced with this man who had seen her darkest parts and still wanted to fight with her, she felt herself faltering. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself again? She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but before the words could escape, the phone on the bar buzzed. Lyra glanced at it. Her heart dropped into her stomach as she saw the message flash across the screen. We're finishing what we started, whether you're with us or not. The final attack was underway, and Lyra was caught in the middle, between her past, her present, and the man who had just asked her to rebuild everything with him. Would she walk away from him, from everything? Or would she stay and fight for a future they might still be able to build together? The weight of everything, the lies, the deceit, the betrayal, hung in the air like a storm cloud, threatening to break. Lyra stood at the edge of the penthouse balcony, looking out over the city that had become her battleground. The lights twinkled below, seemingly indifferent to the war waging inside her. Orion's confession, his proposal, the final hacker attack, it had all led to this moment. A moment where everything she'd built, everything she'd fought for, was coming undone. Her fingers tightened around the railing, the cold metal biting into her skin, grounding her as her mind raced. She could hear Orion's footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate, as though he, too, understood that the next words they spoke would change everything. The silence between them felt heavier than the words left unspoken. He had been patient with her, more patient than she deserved. But now she couldn't avoid the question that had been gnawing at her for days. "You asked me to trust you," she said without turning around, her voice tight with the weight of her own internal battle. "And I did. I trusted you when I never thought I could. But can I trust myself?" She finally turned to face him, her eyes searching his, looking for any sign of the man she had once believed was an enemy, now someone she was beginning to love, someone she feared she might lose. Orion stood still, his gaze unwavering, and for a moment his expression softened. His hands were clasped behind his back, and the tension in his jaw spoke volumes. "You don't have to have all the answers now, Lyra. I just need you to know I'm here. I'm with you." His words were raw, vulnerable in a way she hadn't heard from him before. It wasn't just a promise to stand by her. It was an invitation to stand together. Lyra took a slow breath, her heart pulling in two directions. The Hacker Collective had been relentless, pushing her to make a choice. They had given her an ultimatum, her loyalty to them or to him. And yet, even with everything that had happened, she found herself standing here, staring into Orion's eyes, wondering if she could truly have both. If love could heal the damage of betrayal, or if it would just make it worse. "You said you wanted to rebuild the company," she said quietly, "but what if I can't do it with you? What if my past, my other life, keeps pulling me back?" Orion stepped closer, his presence like a weight that anchored her in the moment. "I don't want to lose you, Lyra. I don't care about your past, about the mistakes you've made. What matters is what we do now, together." Her heart twisted, the truth of his words piercing deeper than anything she'd expected. But still, something inside her, a voice of fear, whispered that she was too far gone to just walk away from the hackers, from the cause that had driven her for so long. The phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting the fragile silence between them. Lyra's heart skipped as she pulled it out, her stomach sinking when she saw the message. "You're running out of time, Lyra. Make your choice. Now." It was Spectre, the leader of the hacker collective. They were growing impatient, and their message left no room for doubt. They wanted her to choose them, or walk away from Orion for good. The ultimatum was clear. Her loyalty to Valex and Orion was a betrayal to them. She had to decide which side she was on. Orion, sensing the shift in her demeanor, took a step closer, his voice a low whisper. "What is it? What's wrong?" Lyra's eyes flicked to the screen, the words burning into her. She couldn't answer him, not yet. She needed time, but time was slipping away, and she knew it. The weight of the collective's threat, combined with the genuine pull she felt toward Orion, was suffocating. I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice faltering. Orion's hand reached out, gently cupping her face, his touch warm against the cool night air. "You don't have to decide everything tonight. We can take this one step at a time. But I need you to know something." His thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away the tears she hadn't realized had fallen. "I'll fight for you, for us. But you have to choose me too." Her breath caught, and she found herself frozen, caught in the gravity of his words. "Choose me." The simple, terrifying truth that if she didn't make this choice, she could lose him forever. But the past, her hacker collective, her family's legacy, loomed over her, casting a shadow that she couldn't escape. She had been living in the gray areas of her life for so long, but now it was time to pick a side. And yet, she couldn't reconcile both parts of herself. Orion's voice, steady and strong, broke through the storm inside her. "Lyra, I've been fighting my whole life for control, of my company, of my future. But now I see that my fight has to be with you, not against you." She closed her eyes, fighting back the overwhelming emotions, torn between the man who had promised to fight beside her and the cause that had given her life meaning. Orion lowered himself onto one knee, the gesture taking her completely by surprise. His gaze never wavered from hers as he held her eyes, his voice soft but unwavering. "Lyra, I don't have all the answers, but I know I love you, and I want to build something real with you. Not a contract, not a lie, just us." Her heart raced as she watched him, the weight of his words settling in. Could she really build something new from the wreckage they'd both caused? Could she finally trust him and herself enough to let go of her past? Orion reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. He opened it slowly, revealing a ring, simple, elegant, the kind she'd never imagined herself wearing. The ring wasn't just an offer to marry him, it was a symbol of trust, of healing. "Will you marry me, Lyra? Not for a contract, not for a business deal, but for real. Will you take a chance on us?" Lyra stared at the ring, her mind spinning, her heart torn between the man who had just bared his soul to her and the world that still demanded her allegiance. The hacker collective would never forgive her for choosing him. But could she really walk away from the man she was beginning to love? Her throat tightened. Words stuck in her chest as the storm inside her finally broke. The decision lay heavy in her hands. Would she choose love, or would duty win, tearing them apart once and for all? The city's skyline stretched before them, vast, glimmering, full of promises they hadn't yet made but might one day keep. Lyra stood beside Orion in the glass-walled conference room, her hand in his. The weight of everything they had endured hung in the air, a silent acknowledgement between them. They had fought, lied, and faced the darkest corners of their own hearts. But here now there was something new, something worth fighting for. Orion's gaze swept over the city, his eyes filled with determination. But there was something else there now, peace, the kind that comes only after a storm has passed. He turned to Lyra, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly in a smile that still held remnants of uncertainty. "You ready for this?" Lyra's heart beat faster. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. Together, they'd peeled back layers of deceit, rebuilt shattered pieces of the company, and started to carve a path for a future neither of them had ever imagined. The hackers had fallen silent, their demands buried under the weight of the change they had both decided was inevitable. "I am," she said, her voice steady, though inside she felt a storm of emotions. The uncertainty of the future still tugged at her. Could they really rebuild not only the company but the trust between them? Could they rebuild their love? Orion squeezed her hand. "You know, this wasn't exactly how I pictured it. Being the guy leading the charge for ethical tech solutions," his lips quirked. "But it feels right, with you by my side." She smiled, a real smile, not the forced one she had worn for so long. It was strange how, after everything, he could still make her feel this way. Could she really trust him again? Could she trust herself? "I think we've both learned a lot about what we're capable of," Lyra replied softly, her thumb brushing the back of his hand. "And maybe we've learned what it means to truly be a team." They had spent weeks in meetings, revamping Valex's mission, working to dismantle the dark corners of its empire that August had built. The new company would focus on transparency, ethical practices, and tech solutions that didn't compromise people's privacy for profit. It wasn't going to be easy, and they knew it. But for the first time in years, it felt like they were moving in the right direction. A new chapter for both of them. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never crossed paths?" Orion asked quietly, his eyes locked with hers. "Would we be happier? Or just lost?" Lyra inhaled slowly, her chest tightening at the thought. She had spent years pretending to be something she wasn't, hiding behind a mission that had consumed her. But now she was standing here with Orion, not just as his wife, but as his equal, his partner in something far more meaningful than either of them had ever expected. "No," she answered, her voice steady, her heart certain. "I don't think I'd be happy without you." He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he pulled her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was gentle yet fierce. The kind of kiss that held the weight of everything they'd been through, the pain, the forgiveness, the second chances. When they pulled apart, their foreheads rested against one another, the closeness offering a fleeting moment of peace in a world that had already begun to move again. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us," Orion said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "But we'll do it together." Lyra nodded, her mind already moving forward. This was it. They had rebuilt their lives, their company, and their relationship. They were both different people now, scarred, yes, but stronger. And more than that, they were together. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. But even as they stood there together, the weight of their decisions still pressed on her. Would love be enough to sustain them? Could it survive the pressures of the world, the betrayals, the secrets that would inevitably continue to surface? She couldn't answer that. Not yet. As the city hummed below them, a notification pinged on Lyra's phone. Her hand froze as she saw the name of the sender. Spectre. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the message. "You've chosen your side, Lyra. But remember, no one walks away unscathed." Lyra's breath caught in her throat, her grip tightening around the phone. Orion didn't notice the change in her expression, too caught up in their shared moment. But this wasn't over yet. The hackers had never truly let go, and Lyra knew that no matter how much she tried to leave her past behind, it would always find a way to drag her back in. She looked at Orion, her heart heavy with the knowledge that their journey, together and apart, was far from finished. The soft hum of the evening air filtered through the open windows of the penthouse. The city lights below twinkled like 1,000 promises, and in that moment everything felt quiet, as if the world had taken a collective breath. Orion stood at the window, staring out at the skyline that had once symbolized everything he wanted to control, everything he had built on a foundation of lies. Now it was a symbol of his redemption, a new chapter for both him and Lyra. His thoughts, though, weren't on the company anymore. They were on her. Lyra. She had been at his side through everything, the lies, the betrayal, the hacker collective, and all the choices that had almost torn them apart. But here they were, standing at the threshold of something new. no longer bound by the contract that had started it all, but by something deeper: love, redemption, and a shared future. She walked into the room, her presence calming the restlessness in his chest. The dress she wore was simple, yet elegant, a stark contrast to the opulence of their surroundings. The hem of the gown brushed against the polished wood floors, the soft white fabric glowing in the light. Orion's heart raced. This wasn't just any moment, it was their moment. A moment of choice, a moment of truth. "I thought you were never going to be ready," Lyra said, her voice teasing. Yet there was a note of vulnerability beneath it. He smiled, the weight of everything that had happened between them, all the pain, the loss, and the healing settling in his chest. "I think I've been ready for a long time. I just didn't know it until you walked back into my life." She met his gaze, her eyes glistening with something that he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or the promise of something greater than either of them had ever dared to dream. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words an echo of everything she had apologized for and everything she hadn't known how to say. For everything. For lying to you. For hiding. He stepped toward her, his voice gentle. "We've both made mistakes, Lyra. But this—" He paused, taking her hands in his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "This is where it matters. This moment. We've both earned it." Her eyes softened as she looked up at him, the weight of her own regret melting away in the warmth of his touch. Do you think we can make it work? After everything?" Orion didn't hesitate. "Yes, I know we can." Her lips trembled into a smile. "Then yes." She took a deep breath, the resolve in her expression solidifying as she added, "I want this. I want you. For real this time." And with that he pulled her into a tight embrace, their hearts beating in sync, the past finally where it belonged. In the past. The ceremony was small, just a handful of their closest allies, those who had stuck by them when everything seemed doomed. There were no lavish decorations or grand gestures. There was only them, the truth, and a love that had been forged in the fire of conflict and emerged stronger for it. Lyra stood before Orion, her hand resting on his chest, her eyes fixed on his as the officiant spoke the words that would bind them together again, this time not out of necessity, but because they had chosen each other despite everything. "With this ring," Orion said, his voice thick with emotion, "I promise to always choose you, even when the world tries to tear us apart. I promise to love you, to fight for you, and to build a future with you, no matter the cost." Lyra's hand shook slightly as she placed the ring on his finger, her voice steady but her heart pounding in her chest. "I promise the same. I promise to love you, not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you've become my future." The officiant smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife. The room filled with applause, but all Lyra could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat and Orion's quiet sigh of relief. The weight of everything that had come before, the lies, the fear, the uncertainty, melted away, leaving nothing but the space they had carved out for each other. Their lives were not going to be simple. Orion had stepped down from his CEO position at Valex, choosing instead to lead a new foundation dedicated to creating ethical tech solutions. It was a move that shocked the industry, but it was also a move that felt right. With Lyra at his side, they began to make real, lasting change, fighting against the very corporate greed they had once been entangled in. Together, they worked to restore trust in the tech industry and in themselves. Lyra, who had once hidden in the shadows, now stood beside Orion as an equal, no longer bound by the secrets of her past. They were a team, stronger, better, and more in love than they had ever been before. Their foundation flourished, and slowly the world began to notice. But the most important thing wasn't their success. It was that they had rebuilt their love, one small, difficult step at a time. As they stood together in their new office, overlooking the city they had once dreamed of conquering, Orion wrapped his arms around Lyra, pulling her close. "This," he said softly, "this is what I always wanted. This is what matters." She leaned into him, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I want this too. Forever." The world had changed. They had changed. But as they stood on the brink of everything they had worked for, a message flashed on Orion's phone. His heart dropped as he read the name of the sender, Spectre. Lyra looked up, sensing the shift in his mood. "What is it?" Orion's fingers tightened around the phone. "It's from the collective." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She thought it was over, but the message was clear. For better, for worse. You can't escape what you've started. Her eyes met his, a mix of resolve and fear flashing across her face. "We knew this wasn't going to be easy," she said softly. Orion turned toward her, his expression hardening with determination. "No, but this time we face it together." And for the first time in their journey, Lyra truly believed it. They were ready. Whatever came next, they would face it together.